Where do you start when the world ends? For Far, Changing Tides, the answer is one marked by uncertainty as you're plunged into the dark, watery depths of despair. Fortunately, your waterlogged woes are only temporary as you quickly swim up to the surface and catch some fresh air. Even the sun's bright and warm embrace, however, proves to be a temporary respite as the light reveals the ugly truth around you. There, surrounded by wrecked homes and flooded lands as far as the eye can see, you quickly realize just how alone you are in a ruined world bereft of any signs of human life. It is amid this oppressing sense of isolation that you set off on your journey to the unknown. As you swim past floating chairs, rocking horses and other eerie remnants of civilization, you can't help but ponder all sorts of questions in your head. What led to all this destruction? Where did everybody go? Where should you go? In a world where no one's left to ask, finding answers can seem like a fool's errand. Forget about finding a needle in a haystack. This is more like finding a needle in the ocean. Just as you start to wonder whether you've been assigned to a life of aimlessly swimming around, however, you run across your ticket out of this situation. Inside a hangar that still remains standing, you find a massive ship beckoning for you to take hold of its reins and bring it out to sea. Now your journey in Far, Changing Tides truly begins. You're the captain now. Like the steamship in the first game, Far, Lone Sails, the ship in Changing Tides is the main star of the show. The massive behemoth not only works as a form of transportation for the lone protagonist, it also serves as the foundation for everything you do in Changing Tides by driving the gameplay forward, no pun intended. While it shares the steampunk-inspired sensibilities of the first ship, this game's version has some notable differences that veteran players will spot. One is that it floats on water as opposed to moving on land. This actually expands the gameplay as Far, Changing Tides now incorporates underwater elements into its repertoire of puzzles to solve in addition to the surface activities that dominated the first game, something I consider to be a plus. Far, Changing Tides ship is also bigger. Much bigger. It's something that leads to a charming dichotomy as you find yourself moving something akin to a gigantic mechanical beast with a little kid who looks simply tiny in comparison. It's also part of an ongoing theme of bigger is better as the sequel builds on the mechanics of Far, Lone Sails while adding even more things to do. Operating the ship, for example, is more complicated this time around. Whereas you simply pressed a button in order to deploy or fold the sails from the first game, Far, Changing Tides turns it into a more complicated multi-step process. First, you have to raise the mast, then climb said mast to grab a rope, and then climb down to hook said rope to a locking mechanism. It's a change that makes the process a lot more interactive, something that initially felt like a pretty neat change. Like the first game, however, Far, Changing Tides will require you to lower and raise the sails multiple times as you come across obstacles along the way lest you want the ship to sustain damage. This makes going through all those steps a bit cumbersome, especially when you find yourself needing to quickly put your sails and mast down without much time to do so. It doesn't help that the larger ship also means you have a more limited view ahead of you. Even when using the game's zoom-out feature, there will be occasions when you won't have a lot of time to quickly lower your sails, especially if you're inside the bowels of the ship as opposed to standing topside by the time you notice an obstacle. Fortunately, you get a tool that can be used to fix a damaged mast, so it's not the end of the world, at least not in the figurative sense. In fact, in a gameplay decision likely done to reduce incidents of controllers being thrown at walls, failing to respond in time with any of the game's many obstacles doesn't end your exploits in Far, Changing Tides. Instead, you'll just have to do extra things in order to get back on track. That being said, it can still be annoying having to go through stuff like this whole song and dance to get your sails up or down, especially when you have a bunch of other things to deal with while operating the ship. In this sense, maybe a simple one-button mechanic like the first game actually would have been better to help streamline things given all the other mechanics that you have to pay attention to. Speaking of game mechanics, you can also adjust the positioning of your sail to take better advantage of wind gusts from different directions. This one is pretty neat as it adds another layer of interactivity to the game that does not feel like busy work. Then again, operating the sails is just one part of Far, Changing Tides gameplay. Final thoughts on Far, Changing Tides. Like its predecessor, Far, Changing Tides serves up a poignant journey through a lonely apocalyptic landscape with a bigger ship, a bigger world, and a bigger scope overall. At the same time, it still retains that same claustrophobic feel and charm, while serving up all sorts of environmental puzzles for you to solve. The extra mechanics can admittedly be frustrating to deal with at times as you find yourself juggling many things at once, and it also doesn't quite have the same sense of newness for veterans of the first game. Overall, however, Far, Changing Tides is the kind of game that makes you wonder and also makes you think, which is a credit to the compelling atmosphere that it deftly provides.